Hi, good afternoon to all. The question I was going to ask is not so much why not a yearning for learning, but actually the question is why are we not yearning for learning? Okay, I'm going to set the tone for this and spend about 15 minutes. And I don't want to talk about the whole education system. I think you have an idea of what's going on. What I do want to do is take a look at what the numbers are telling us. And when you take a look at these numbers, they begin to start saying something about whether we really value education or are we just content to put our kids in school. Another way of phrasing it is that we tend to think school is important, but are we just going through the form and not picking up what schools are really all about, and that is education? So the question I'm going to ask is, why are we not yearning? Why are we not yearning more for learning? I'm going to say a little bit of something about the Philippine education system, what the numbers are telling us. I want to show you what the future is like, because if we don't change the way we do things, the gaps are going to be large. They might even get larger. And certainly, when you take a look at those numbers, they're going to drag the economy down. Okay, let's start by, I hear this statement all the time. Right? You ask Filipino families, what is the most important thing that they want to leave their children with? And they will always say education. In fact, if you look at the surveys, they will rate education as the highest concern. And yet, if you take a look at our indicators, number one, too many of our children are dropping out of school. They're not finishing, or if they finish, they're doing very poorly. Now, many of you are from private schools. And you might wonder if this is the reality. Well, 95% of all the children who go to elementary school in this country go to public schools. And this is the reality in public schools. When you get to high school, we are only about 18% going to private schools. And that number, by the way, is dropping quite rapidly. If you go back about 30 years ago, the number was 50-50. 50% in private high schools, 50% in public high schools. Today, the number is 18% in private, and it's getting smaller. And the reason is that many parents can't afford the tuition. They're shifting their kids to public schools, public high schools. Okay. So if we take a look at the numbers, the question you really have to ask is, do we really value education, or is it really the idea that we find important? Or is education valued only by those who can afford it? And if that's the case, then the rich get richer. Okay, let's take a look at the numbers. If you take a look at the workforce, SW asked heads of household that they were surveying, what's the highest education attainment you have reached? 1.6% have no formal education, never started, never entered, not even grade 1. 37.5 up to elementary graduate. 33.8 some high school or maybe even finished high school. 13.8 some college, which means that they finished high school, and 13.3 have graduated from college and have gone even beyond college. Now, if college becomes the cutoff by which you want to hire somebody, then very clearly you are limited to only about 27-28% of the population. About a fourth of the population is hireable. And if you ask, or if you require that a high school graduate is the minimum criteria for hiring, then you're only going to hire about 42% of your population. almost 60% do not finish high school. And this is quite serious. If you compare it to countries that were similar to us in the 70s and the 60s, going back to the 50s, you're talking Korea, you're talking Taiwan, you're talking Thailand, Malaysia. Today, high school graduates are up around 80 to 95%, depending on the country. And yet, if you go back to the 60s and even to the 50s, they had a much lower high school graduate rate, completion rate, than the Philippines. So they have taken off, they have surpassed us, we continue to be stuck at this number. This is how we perform. For every 100 kids who enters grade 1, only 84 are going to make it to grade 2. We lose 16% of our kids before they get to grade 2. By the time you get to grade 4, we're down to 76 of the 100. So 1/4 of our kids have dropped out before grade 4. Now, why is grade 4 critical? Because by the time you finish grade 3, you should have the following skills: reading, writing, arithmetic. And when you talk about arithmetic, that's multiplication and division. Now, if you don't have any of those by the time you get to the end of grade 3, then functional literacy becomes a real problem. Now, if you have about 24% of the kids dropping out before they get to grade 4, then chances are they have not mastered arithmetic. They may not be able to read, they may not be able to write properly. Reading and writing, by the way, doesn't have to be in English. It can be in any language, including the local dialect. So the problem we have now is that by the time you get to grade 4, you've lost about 1/4 of our kids. If you take a look at literacy, functional literacy today, it is about 80%. So the correlation is very strong. By the time you get to grade 6, we're down to 68. And by the time you get to the last day, graduation day, grade 6, we're down to 65%. 1/3 of our kids have dropped out of school before elementary graduation. Now you take a look at the transition from grade 6 to the first year of high school. Even though they finish grade 6, of the 65 that finish grade 6, only about 57 will go to high school. That's a 12% dropout rate. It is the second highest dropout rate after grade 1 to grade 2. Get to the end of fourth year high school. Okay, it is the fourth column from the right. It's about 42%. Only 42 of the original 100 will finish high school. And then 22 of that will go to college, 14 will finish college, and at the end you will see that only 2 out of the original 100 will have a real science degree. And a real science degree is not a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. It's really a math degree, a biology degree, chemistry, physics. It's a real science degree. All right? So, this is how it has performed. By the way, this is a real cohort. Okay? This is the class of that started grade 1 in 1994 and graduated from high school in 2004. So it's a real number. It's not made up. But it turns out to be a typical number if you go back over the last 10 or so years. Right? Now, what's happening here? Why are kids dropping out between grades 1 and 4? It's really a health and nutrition problem. 1/3, 30% of the kids in elementary school, public elementary school, are underweight, under height, or suffer some form of malnutrition. And that's why they cannot stay in school every day for so many hours. They are not physically strong enough to stay in school. It's a health and nutrition problem. And this is why school feeding is so important. If you take a look at why they're dropping out between grades 4 to 6, it's really a learning problem. They have trouble with reading, writing, and with arithmetic. And the problem is that if you don't master the 3 R's by the time you get to grade 4, then everything after that is remedial. And you know that once it's remedial, you will never learn the new stuff because you're always trying to catch up with the old stuff. Once you fall into the remedial trap, it's very hard to get out of it. Why are they dropping out in high school? It's really an achievement gap. If you can't read, write, and do math at the first year high school level, there's no way you're going to be interested in chemistry or physics or biology, much less calculus, trigonometry, geometry, right? And so what happens is you have a lot of kids who say, if you can't do it, if I can't do this well, there's no point staying in school. And they drop out. Well, guess what? It's the boys that are dropping out. The boys drop out 2.5 times more than the girls. And I've said this before, and I've written about it, where I've said that if we don't change this pattern, and the boys continue to drop out, we are fast becoming a nation of male underachievers. The boys are the problem. And when you take a look at the end of the college track, only 2 out of the original 100 really have a science degree. There's no way you can build an industrial economy with such a small science base. If you take a look, and this was work that we did in AIM, and what we did was we took a look at the manpower, the profile of the labor force, and we projected it up to 2040. Do that statistically, it's pretty simple. If you take a look at it, that's that line, or under that curve. That's the population with a college degree. The top line, the top curve, is the total workforce. Okay? Whether they're working or not is not material. That's the age group that is in the workforce. And you can see how little or how few relative to the total workforce have a college degree. That's the cohort if you include high school graduates. So you can see that the numbers are pretty large, right? It's about 35%. In reality, that number should be only about 15 to 20%. So we have to go a long way to keep kids in school. The problem with this is if that's the pattern, then what happens is we have a workforce that does not have the qualifications. And the problem with this is if the best qualified people in our workforce are the ones going abroad, the ones that are left behind, is that group in the green portion which don't have a lot of skill, right? If you don't have a lot of skill, there's not going to be a lot of demand for your services. All of this is going to take some time to do. Education is a very long process. You have to start, if you want to talk about reading, writing, arithmetic, keeping kids in school, you have to start in grade 1. And it's going to take 10 years for you to see a whole cohort through. We ran some numbers in DepEd, asking ourselves the question, what if we try to keep more kids in school? So we said, what if we try to keep 10% of every grade level, whatever is in school right now, we'll try to improve that by 10% of that number. So if the number was 76, we would try to add 7.6% more, try to retain that many more kids in the system. Well, guess what? When you run those numbers, just by retaining kids in school, very quickly, you add 1 million more kids in the system. And 1 million kids means divided by 50, that's the number of classrooms. Divided by 50, that's the number of teachers. Each kid is supposed to get 5 textbooks. Each kid is supposed to get a desk and a chair. All those numbers add up very quickly. And remember, this is not adding more population, we're merely retaining kids. We're preventing them, or we're trying to stop the dropouts. So the numbers get very, very large. And in public schools, if our numbers are already overcrowded, you can imagine if we retain more kids in school, how much more overcrowded it would be. What does society ask of our children? Well, these are the surveys done by industry groups, right? This is the Human Resource Associations. This is the Management Association of the Philippines. This is the Productivity Center, DAP. They're looking for graduates who can speak, who can communicate, who can think logically, who can solve problems. None of this is really textbook stuff. All of this is about how to think. They're also looking for attributes such as self-discipline or self-starting qualities, because you can't expect somebody to be telling you what to do every day. You want kids who grow up educated, can make decisions for themselves. They want graduates with a service orientation so they know how to work. And if you look at basic knowledge, they want kids who have math and science. Because math and science is really the foundation for logic. And once you can think logically, you should be able to solve problems. Others, English language proficiency, really that's more a sign of the times. And they're increasingly looking for more computer literate students, graduates. In reality, what are they getting? This comes from the DAP, the Productivity and Development Center. And you can see, just on basic writing, reading, arithmetic, that's an elementary skill, right? Well, they are asking employers to rate graduates who are coming to them, and these graduates are college graduates. And look at what the employers are saying. Basic reading, writing, arithmetic, which is an elementary level skill, they're not quite there. Theoretical knowledge and work skills, which is a secondary skill, not quite. Practical knowledge and skills of work, which is a high school skill, employers are saying it's hard to tell whether or not they really know how to work. And so on and so forth. When you go down the list, the consensus among employers is that a high school diploma with its current coverage is inadequate for their purposes. And yet remember that when they are talking about workers joining the workforce, it is not just high school, it is also college. And you can imagine if college graduates are themselves deficient, you can imagine they spent 4 years, paid for that tuition, what did they get? So what are we producing? Well, take a look at the numbers in terms of percentage. Among the unschooled or inadequately schooled, if we take a look at elementary school dropouts as a percentage of that particular age cohort, then you're talking 33%, a third. If you add high school dropouts to that, you're adding about 22%. So right there, 55% of that cohort is already inadequately schooled, either elementary dropout or high school dropout. The second is schooled but not properly educated. Remember the high school readiness test? That famous high school readiness test that was given in 2004. We gave a test to grade 6 students, and we asked them, are you prepared for high school? Well, it turned out 1.5% were prepared. And prepared meant that they scored 75% on the test. 7% scored 50%, and 93% or so scored below 50%. In fact, the median score was only 30%. You do the aptitude, the achievement tests for high school, and you find out that only about 8% of the high school graduates actually scored 75% or higher on the achievement test. 92% are actually failing if you use 75 as the passing. So, if you take a look at the whole cohort, and only about 42% of the population is a high school graduate, then we ask ourselves, how many are really schooled properly? And our estimates of only about 35 of the 42. If you take a look at special sectors with little access to schooling, which is among these are indigenous people, the urban and the rural poor, many of them you see on the streets, you add about 2%. When you take a look at it, only 8% of our children in a particular cohort are actually being properly educated up through the end of high school. That's the group that if you want to hire, only about 8% really have the quality that's going to make it worth hiring. 92% are actually poorly educated. And this is the problem we have in this country. It's not only a quantity game, it's a quality game. And this is where we are losing out badly. So let's take a look at the way forward. And this is, there are many examples. It's really the bullet, the numbers that you want to take a look at. The most important is you need to get kids to school. You need to get kids to school in grade 1. There are many programs that try to do this. Among these are Tulong sa Tao, Petron Foundation, Centex of Ayala Foundation. There are many preschool Head Start type programs. I just have to tell you that in the public sector, preschool is not a requirement. And only about 16% of our public school kids actually go to preschool. Compare this to private schools, where most of our kids not only do preschool, they do 2 or 3 years of preschool, kindergarten included, and they are better prepared. That's why private school kids tend to read even before grade 1. In the public school, most of our kids are not able to read up through the start of grade 3. The second is we want elementary achievement. Of course, we want them to finish, but we want them to finish with achievement. The most important thing we need to do for most of our kids is ensure that they can read by the time they get to the end of grade 3. Every child a reader by grade 3. If you cannot read by the end of grade 3, everything after that is remedial. And as I said, remedial just makes it so much more difficult to learn. There are many programs that you can take a look at. There's Saaklat Sisikat, there's Sinergia Foundation, Books for the Barrios, model schools, other reading programs, many programs that you can choose from. Of course, the numbers are so large that even if you support all of these programs, many of our kids are still not reached in terms of reading. The third is transition to high school. As I said, this is the second stage which has the highest dropout rate, 12%. Okay? We need to find ways to transition kids to high school. We need to keep kids in high school, especially boys, and we find out that the 2 ways to keep boys in school, based on DepEd's surveys, is we need to bring technical vocational education back to high school. The boys are not interested in physics, in chemistry, in going to college. Girls outnumber boys in terms of graduation and in terms of interest in going to college. Boys are more interested in work, and because they cannot handle calculus, geometry, the higher level math and sciences, they're looking for technical vocational education. Unfortunately, that was taken out and given to TESDA, so today we have very little technical vocational in our public high schools. We need to bring it back. Second is school sports, right? School sports are the biggest driver for keeping boys in school. Now, even if they're not scholar athletes, the fact that they're staying in school is better than having them drop out, no credential, no diploma, and doing meaningless work or very little work. We need high school achievement. There are many different ways of looking at this. There's GILAS, which is a program to interconnect to the web all our high schools. There are smart schools. You'll hear a little bit more of that today. And lastly, we need to have programs for special sectors. In particular, two sectors which are underserved: Muslim Filipino children, and in Mindanao, this is a big problem. And second is indigenous people, many of whom barely make it into elementary school. And if you don't do something about them, then we're going to have a real problem. Okay? So, let me end by just saying, we value education, or so we say. But in reality, when you look at the numbers, it doesn't hold up. Too many kids are out of school, too many kids are dropping out of school, and if they're finishing school, they're finishing with very little achievement. We have to do something about that. And we can't do this as individual families, as individual communities. We really need to do this as a system. One of the things that I hope we can talk about a little bit today is we need to start changing the way we deliver education. And I think the examples that you're going to hear later on are ways by which alternatives are being provided. If we continue to deliver education the same way we are doing it today, then the trend just continues, and if we have poor outcomes today, we will have more poor outcomes tomorrow. And I can tell you, we cannot afford to continue with business as usual. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Sir Mike.